Greetings, everyone, and a short g'day to you all. The name is Buzz Fisher. We've got Sean Ophir there. Greetings.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, excellent. Look, today is another interesting discussion. We're going to follow up what we mentioned and talked about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we talked about why organizations are being misled when it comes to data protection. Today, we're going to talk about, and I'm going to pose this question to you, Sean. Why are organizations being misled when it comes to mitigating insider risk?
Well, the answer is quite short. Organizations today understand that the human element is a major risk source, and they invest fortune in different type of controls and appliances, identity management, access controls, DLPs, encryptions, firewalls, physical security, but same products, log management, etc. But the reality shows us that the problem still exists. So the question is, how come they invest so much and they are being told that all of these solutions will help them to solve the problem while the problem is still there?
That's correct. Correct. It's I was going to say it's a big misnomer. The question, when I look at it from a perspective, and when we talk about it a lot, when we talk about an organization protecting their cyber, we tend to look at cyber. But when it comes to people, we still look at cyber. And there's a lovely little quote that I wanted to relate, which is basically, if you tread water long enough, you'll sink. And basically it means that if you approach with the same set of framework or mindset to protecting your business, then it's not going to actually work when it comes to dealing and managing the risk from people. So why do you think it is that organizations just have probably not sure how to approach in terms of mitigating insider risk?
Well, what I see and what we actually both see a lot with organizations that we meet, when we talk about, for example, external threats, external risks, we see a very good understanding and maybe a good approach to tackle those risks from the right, from the external side. So we look at solutions on the cloud, we look at public-facing solutions like scanning the deep dark web, threat intelligence. And they get as much as closer to those hackers, spies, or any other external threat actors that if they are caught, they will be prosecuted. But the organization block itself from outside, which is good, because if it's external, block it from outside. But when it comes to internal risks, insider risks, we tend to see organizations try to or maintain some kind of a unseen gap. So they invest in a lot of solutions and they try to get as much as close to the internal employee, but they still keep a gap. For example, if you have one DLP or 10 DLPs or identity management, password vaults, a lot of other good stuff, still it doesn't solve the problem, because when it comes to insider risk, it's all about the intention and motive. And if those intentions are not being monitored or being changed, the problem is still there. So when it comes to insider risk, it's like they don't really touch and reach to and those employees are there. That's the funny part. They are there in the organization. They're not hard to access.
Correct. I think that the most difficult challenge for any organization today.
Cheers. We are in a pub, so
yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. That's all told. I was going to continue sexual discussion, interrupting. Yeah. So the big challenge organizations have today is there's no person. We talk about accountability or responsibility. There's no person or a group of people within an organization that say, yes, I'm going to put the cap on my hat and I'm going to be responsible for mitigating insider risk. What the traditional approach in Australia and elsewhere, let me exclude the US because they've got something different. The traditional approach is, well, we've got risk, let's throw it to the Chief Information Security Officer. But as we know, and we've talked about often, that their responsibility lies about protecting information and security systems. Dealing with people behavior is something completely altogether different subject. And they wouldn't have a clue how to deal with people. They'll try and do it from a technology perspective to try and limit what they can and can't do. But when it comes to their behavior, that's a different story. So the question is, who within the organization is going to take charge of managing risk that comes from within? And from my perspective and your perspective, there's a great, confusion, but also not knowing. We talk about conscious competence. We don't even have that. They don't know what they don't know. So, I mean, what they're trying to do is say, okay, we think we know there's a problem, but let's bury it somewhere so we don't have to deal with it. Let's hide it underneath the cupboard. Let's put it in the cupboards. So we hope that it'll never bite us. And I'm not sure if confusion is the right word. It's like, where do you start? Where would you start?
Yeah. Look, the question is what's the process of identifying the problem and how to put a plan to solve it. So in today, situation, usually the vendors are dictating to organizations what are their problems, and they're promoting themselves instead of really solve the problem. Or more organizations, especially the business owners and the CXO level, they need to understand and realize that whenever they have a problem, whenever they're managing risks the whole day. And this is what a big part of their work, to manage the risk, to make sure that financials and IP are in place and the organization is still profitable and function properly. So they try to mitigate the risk in various ways. It starts with the physical security and with HR processes, and then they want to protect the data. Now, for leaving the organization. Now, in a parallel world where documents, files, and USB sticks they have their own soul, so they can decide to leave the organization by themselves. Right, controls should be in place to stop the data from going outside or to stop IP from flying outside the window. But in our world, it doesn't happen without the involvement of people. People are the source of everything. So if we know that the people are the source of the risk, but we don't treat those people and we look at the data, it's the same like when you are in a stadium watching a footy game, and the guards that are placed on the stadium ground, they are facing the game, the players, instead of the audience. And if something is thrown from the audience, then they will start to investigate, collect a lot of forensic evidence, calculate angles and wind speed, etc. Instead of just facing the crowd where this risk come from, identify the risk and stop it, and also respond. So I think you said there is no confusion. Well, I think there is a lack of responsibility awareness. Who is responsible to people incidents? The same person in a company. It doesn't matter which what role he functions. He can be violent. He can commit sexual harassments. He can commit any physical damage, steal, fraud, even IT misconduct. Now, or unethical behavior. Now, each incident will have different responsible person in the organization. So when it comes to responsibility awareness, who is in charge of providing or entitled these responsibility to employees?
That's a very good question, because usually when you look at behavior, you would expect that the human resource would take over. But as we both know, that sort of been lacking. I mean, it's been more, I think HR has been acting more as an administrator rather than manager. They're more concerned about onboarding people, candidates, new candidates, and so forth. But from then on, there's no higher level management. If these people have a challenge, whether it be, as you said, if there's bullying or some form of misconduct, how is that treated? So often, a treat of policy violation is looked at as a technology. So what technology control have they breached? Not from a perspective of what behavior they've breached. So often when you have things like bullying or those sort of aggressive behaviors, they're not even reported. They're sort of, we see it, but we're not going to do anything about it because we don't want to get into an emotional discussion. We don't want to get into an emotional situation where we don't feel good about challenging another person's behavior. So we allow them. That's why bullies know they can get away with it because they'll keep on doing because no one is actually standing up. And then even when they get reported, the managers don't do anything about it because they are afraid of standing up. So we have a situation which is really a people related. And what we've seen also, there's a huge connection when you have behavior manifesting itself from a physical element, then taking to a digital element. So we could have physical bullying, and then that could take it into a virtual bullying. And again, how does the organization treat it? And that becomes extremely difficult. And maybe that's a confusion, or they're just not sure how to approach it. But from a technology perspective, it's more firewalls, more SIM solutions, more DLP solutions to protect and ensure those policies and controls are there. But I look at it as just more of a tick in the box. It doesn't solve the problem, and we both know it quite well. And look, how do you see the situation when we talk about compliance? I mean, you have a lovely story about compliance in regards to a driving license. I have a different story, but I'd like to get your idea, your metaphor.
Yeah, look, we in all our sessions and in all our conversations, the main subject and the main topic is people. When people get the driver license, prior to driver license, they don't know how to drive and they're not aware of all the rules. So they need to study all the rules. They need to study the signs. They need to pass the theory test and also pass the driving test, which, by the way, they are the best driver ever in this driving test. Now, after post the driving test, they get the license, which is basically they're getting the trust from the state, from the country, that they allow them to drive. But from that moment, their behaviors vary. And they're not the best drivers from that moment. One day they're good, one day they're bad. They know the rules, they know the policies, they know everything, but still there are accidents. Why? Because that's the nature of people. And I have even a better example, and this everybody can relate it to themselves. When we were young, our parents took us by hand and taught us how to cross the road. They taught us that red guy is the bad guy and green guy is the good guy. So whenever there's green, we should cross. Now, I ask each one of you that watched that video, when was the first time you decided to cross there? When was the first time you dared to cross in red light? It probably happens in some early stage when you thought there is nothing on the road, you looked right and left, right. You thought, well, you're safe, and you ran. You did it very fast. And on the next few times, you slowed. You started to cross with more. You gained confidence. And today, if you will go to the city, the CBD, or everywhere, you will see people just crossing. They know the policy. They know they shouldn't cross. They know all the risks. They were taught not to do that, but people take calculated risks on their behalf. Now, no organization should allow employees to take calculated risks on the organization's behalf. So when organizations understand today, and I think, Boaz, you can tell the example of that financial controller that stole more than half a billion dollar from the Schnitz organization. She was the financial controller. She knew all the controls. She set the controls. It's like the cat, put a cat to take care of the cream. And she knew how to bypass all the controls. So if I asked the CEO of Schnitz, if you had 10 firewalls and another 10 different identity management or access controls, and let's say you have 3 or 4 very big and very expensive log systems, SIEM, would that stop it? And he would look in my eyes with a big sorrow, but confidently, he would be very confident with saying no, because that employee could bypass even 100 firewalls. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
correct.
I think organizations needs to know to pick the right weapon for the right battle. If you fight with data and technology, if it's a data thing, do it with technology. If it's people thing, you should do it with people or people understanding.
Correct. I think what we related early on is that if it's on the outside, or if it's external, throw through your perimeter and so forth. But if it's internal, find the source of the problem and focus on the source. Focus on mitigating the source, and then there's a big difference. Now, we talked about technologies, we talked about vendors. I wanted you to also relate a very similar story about, for example, the laptop. And because I'll give you a reference from my side, and you know it, obviously. I approach an organization, a CISO within a large organization, and I basically asked a very simple question: how do you manage insider risk? And the simple response: well, we use a log management. We collect all logs, and that's how we mitigate our risk. So, having said that, again, this is about a misconception and being deceived by the organization, but it also could be, from their perspective, a shortcut. We talk about the path of least resistance, which is basically, if you look at water as it flows down, it'll find the path of least resistance. So people in their roles will look for ways that they can mitigate it as quickly as possible, because then they don't have to deal with it. So knowing that, and you know the story about the laptop, about what it can and can't record, why don't you give a sort of a quick metaphor to dispel how effective it is?
Yeah, so when we ask, it happened many times that we ask CISOs, how do you protect yourself against people incidents? And everybody proudly wave we have a SIEM. We have 2 SIEM. We have log management. We collect everything. Now, you ask yourself, well, if you have a system that collects all the white noise in your environment, all the technical logs, all the system logs, and you collect it into one machine. Let's take a laptop, for example. I am authorized to work in the organization, and my laptop logs everything. You have the event viewer, everything goes to the SIEM. Now, I'll open, I got an email with a very sensitive Excel report. I'll open that report. I'll review the numbers. I'll copy some of the numbers, put them on a notepad, change the notepad name, the file name, send it via, let's say, a WhatsApp or a Telegram, okay? And also I'll make a quick WhatsApp chat and maybe write an email. Now, if everything was logged, you assume that everything would be visible, right? A big wrong, because whenever we ask those CISOs or whatever position we ask, can you tell me what I just did? Nobody can have an answer, because when you collect, within the 20 seconds I worked, there were about maybe 3,000 log lines of events. Now, how can you think, or how can you be sure that, well, in other words, organizations think that they can infer people behavior using log files? or system logs. How come? What is the origin of system logs? It was designed by developers for themselves, for debug purposes. How can you look at machine logs to understand people behavior? It's crazy. Why, if you want to understand people behavior, for God's sake, look at the people, look at their actions, monitor their actions. It's a different weapon for that battle.
Correct. And we talk about it often. I think if you're going to choose the technology, you need to be aware of how the technology is able to shape their behavior so that they can act in the best interest of the organization. So the question is that if you decide, well, a SIM is really useful, it probably is if you want to manage your systems and your technologies and you want to understand the risks of those systems. But if you want to be able to effectively shape people, your employees or even contractors who've got access to your assets, and you want to affect their behavior so that they don't become a risk, then you need to find some appropriate deterrence mechanism to be able to do that. And so I think looking at what you have, you can actually quickly identify whether it can or it can't do that in a good way. So look, we're getting close to the end. I was going to actually ask you then, what are the takeaways from what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, so you just talked about that a few moments ago. You know, when you look at your system, if something is broken in your environment, it will get fixed. If a door is broken, if a boom gate is broken, if the lift doesn't work, if a server died or crashed, if you ran out of space, everything is monitored in real time and it will get fixed. Organizations understand that, so they know the systems very well, so that they can protect it and manage it. When it comes to people, that's the problem. When people are broken, when people are not working so well, and I'm talking about people are sad, happy, frustrated, aggressive, etc., etc. You have, I can stop tomorrow. You know, they name all the characters. Nothing is get fixed. Nothing is get identified unless it's physical. If someone comes drunk to work, or dirty clothes, or is something visible. If it's not visible, it's a problem. So I think when it comes to people, people monitoring, look at people observation, and when you understand people actions, when you understand and monitor people activities, and you can respond in time to bad behavior or early indicators of compromise, you can act and you can stop and deter. And by deterring people, by shifting them from good to bad, you actually help to change them and fix them and shape their behavior. So I think the key takeaway here is when you deal with people, you should look at people and put more focus on that. That's the source of the problem.
Correct. Okay, it was interesting actually. Yeah, no, it's a good takeaway. I think the idea, for example, just to make it sort of down to basic language. So, for example, when you're driving, because we like using driving as a good metaphor. So when you have, for example, speed cameras that they're there, they're going to actually shape your behavior. But another thing I actually noticed today is speed bumps. Because as you're driving, you don't want to go too quickly over speed bumps. So that forces you to change your behavior for that period of time. So there are many ways that organizations can go about helping people to act in the best interest. Part of it is what we call as employee engagement. How can we get people more engaged in a positive manner? And then another side is then how do we use the tools and controls to best effectively provide guidance and deterrence for people or employees as such to do the right thing. So that's my takeaway. So that basically covers it. So today we talked about, just summing it up, we talked about why organizations are being misled when it comes to mitigating insider risk. We talked about vendors. We talked about why, CISOs like to choose technology. We talked about that, these technologies don't actually solve the problem. The problem is still there because they're not actually dealing with people. We also talked about the situation where organizations don't have a dedicated insider risk person. In the United States, you can stand up an insidership program, but we don't see it here in Australasia. We talked about vendors trying to help themselves to make and increase their cash flow, and we talked about in terms of the confusion and misconceptions that organizations find themselves difficult to understand where to start. It's a difficult problem.
Yeah.
And we talked about people behavior as the number one. And when you deal with behavior, then it's a challenge. And again, organizations are not being trained to deal with behavior. So I think, have I summed it up reasonably well?
No, I think you summarized really well. If there is a Pandora box and you're afraid to open it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. If there is a problem and you don't have the right tools or the approach, or you're scared to touch it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's like tooth cavity. Don't lose your teeth. Don't lose your business. If you have a people problem, start to look at people. That's I think that's the key.
Correct. And now with that, what we'll do is I'll ask for your permission just to talk about what Sean does and what my company does. And so if you are looking for a situation where you might have a risk, could be whether someone has breached a policy within your organization, or you failed a security assessment and it's come from people, or you're looking to increase the maturity of your organization. Look, reach out to Sean or to myself. Sean looks at very much the technology side of things, about the controls and policies that most affect employees and organizations to do the right thing. And I come from the strategy to help you mitigate the risk. So if you've got a concern about how your organization's maturity, reach out to us, because we can come and do a number of different things. One of them could be an insider risk assessment. Sean, you were going to mention something as well.
Yeah, so whether it's an IP theft, data breaches, policy violations, financial fraud, human processing errors, even a workplace unethical behavior, or, well, it's very relevant to today, the work from home, lack of visibility and control, it's all about people. And we can provide the technology to enable you organizations identify, detect, deter, and disrupt the human risk element. Using various tools and techniques, we can help you be in control and reduce the risk in the organization when it comes to people.
So an easy way for you to engage with us, Sean is actually providing a free consultation that you can book his time. So that's probably the easiest way to get started. Sean usually gets me involved, so we're happy to chat, but we'll have all those details below. So yeah, feel free to reach out. This is a free consultation, so it's worth quite a bit of time and money, but it's free for you, so take advantage of it. And look, that's basically what I wanted to talk today. It's been a much shorter live streaming webinar, so that's good. And with that, I think what's happening in a fortnight, we haven't decided. We might have a guest, but we'll identify that pretty soon.
Let's keep this in a surprise, but we'll keep it in a surprise. Guys, subscribe below. Watch I'm happy to get your comments and any suggestions for future sessions. And thank you, everybody, for joining today.
Great. Thanks. Cheers, guys.